All right. Again, thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it. My presentation tonight is on John Wooden, the former UCLA basketball coach. He coached, we'll do a little bit of background information, but my presentation tonight is on analysis of John Wooden and his use of Monroe's motivational sequence through speech and action. I've read several books by Coach Wooden and about Coach Wooden, including Seth Davis's biography that was released about him a couple of years ago. And I'm always amazed by the way a man like him was able to get a team of varying personalities and beliefs to win together consistently in a rapidly changing culture. He won 10 national championships in the last 12 years of his coaching career, which is something that's never been done before and will likely never be done since. Today we're going to look at 3 different aspects of Monroe's motivated sequence. There are 5 aspects of the entire thing. I believe John Wooden used 3 of them in order to reach his players, and that was attention, visualization, and action. First, we'll do a little bit of background. John Wooden was born on October 14th, 1910. He played college basketball. He was in Hall, Indiana. He played college basketball at Purdue in the 30s. He was awarded Big Ten honors every year but his freshman year. Back at that time, freshmen were not allowed to play varsity basketball. He played several seasons of professional basketball before the NBA was created, all while teaching high school English and coaching. And he joined the U.S. Navy throughout World War II. He coached at 2 schools. Like I said earlier, his entire career, he coached at Indiana State for 2 years and coached at UCLA for the rest of that time. Like I said, we're going to go over 3 different aspects of Monroe's motivated sequence: attention, visualization, and action. For attention, Wooden got the attention of his players through several ways. He spent a lot of time with his players on the court. He got the attention of his players by being an active listener, but by also having them asking interactive questions to him and showing illustrations and using other engaging actions. For an illustration, we'll talk about the pyramid of success a little bit later, something that he developed for his players to follow in order to achieve success as an illustration for them to kind of see what the success looks like, more than just what it looks like in material ways. He also consistently, like I said, spent time on the court with his players, guiding and critiquing their form, but beyond that, he gave his players the opportunity to teach one another, spend time with each other on the court. They would have grueling practices that he would spend time with guys afterwards. There's a story of a guy that joined as a freshman who didn't quite fit into the team right away with his style of play, and John Wooden just spent time watching and just observing this guy practice. And he wasn't like telling him what he was doing wrong. He wasn't necessarily saying like this guy doesn't fit, because obviously his skill got him to UCLA in the first place, but he just wanted to see how he could mold this guy to better fit what he was doing with UCLA. He would patiently listen to his players and give them the opportunity to explain his game plans back to him before they took the court for the game, so that he would know for sure that they had an understanding of what he wanted to do. And that way he could critique them one-on-one and change some things before the game started. He would also routinely engage in conversation with his players about the world and just about general things. He was from a very different background than a lot of these guys. It was from the turn of the century, and so he was coaching in the 60s and 70s during the civil rights movement, during the hippie movement, and these guys were from a very, very different place than where he was from. And so he had to really try to figure out how to not only get these guys to play together, but to have them have respect for him, coming from a very different background. And so he spent a lot of time talking about the world, listening to them and what they had to say, and giving them a chance to speak their mind. This was a time in American history where college-age kids and youth really wanted to have people listen to what they had to say, and he gave that opportunity for them. Now, he also still ran a pretty tight ship and did some things that made sure that that seemed pretty strict at the time, but he also gave time for his players to kind of express themselves as well. When it comes to visualization, he helped his players see the goals that they were aiming for in a couple of different ways. He was known to bench players until they learned how to work out their differences. He, just kind of like what Coach K is doing now, he recruited some of the best people, the best players at high school in their time. And so when you're bringing 5, 6 of the best players in the country that are all going to take the court for you, there's a lot of different personalities and a lot of different guys that think that they're the guy. And you have to work with that, and you have to make sure that they work with one another. And he had some difficulties with that over his time, and sometimes he would teach them a lesson and just have them sit until they learned that what they were doing as a team was bigger than what they wanted to do individually. And he knew that once they learned that, they were going to have more success. There were 2 or 3 seasons straight that they did not lose a single game. And you can't do that without guys knowing that they're a part of something a lot bigger than just themselves. They were put in situations during practice that were a lot more grueling. His practices were known to be a lot more grueling than the actual games because they had to build up the stamina, because there were teams that they were playing against that were going to run the court on him and going to try to run the court on him. And John Wooden's philosophy was a lot more old school because of the kind of guy he was and just his age. And so when they're coming up against the teams like Houston in the 1970s, Houston had a crazy good basketball team in the 70s that would just run the court on you. And they had to have practices that made sure that they were in better shape than the teams that were trying to run the court on them. And that's how they were able to stay on top for so long. The other thing, too, was life skills. John Wooden made sure that his goal as a coach was to develop young men that would have a life beyond basketball, that would contribute to society beyond just being a basketball player. He taught them based on his own lessons and the lessons that he learned from people that he looked up to, that he wanted to be judged. The success of his career was to be judged on the kind of people he produced in society. He wanted to be judged on the guys that I coached 20 years from now. Are they doctors and lawyers and teachers? Do they have families? Are they supporting their families? More so than how many national championships did we win, how many games did we win. That's what he cared about more than anything. Also, when it came to visualization, regardless of wins or losses, he wanted his players to stay even keel. He really believed keeping an even keel attitude was a key to a lot of things. He didn't use profanity at all, which is hard to believe, especially in intense competition, but he never used profanity. And he really encouraged his players after a win or a loss that they would keep their cool. What he would say is if an outsider who wasn't at the game saw you afterwards on campus, they should be able to tell by your body language whether you won or whether you lost. Which is kind of crazy to think, because I know, I'm sure a lot of you guys that play sports, I work with a football team. After a loss, it's very visible on my facial expression and through my body language, whether we won or whether we lost. And that's really, really difficult to try to keep your cool and be able to have an impact on people no matter what happened on the court. Put it past you and really focus on what you need to do next. One of the sources that I looked up, this was from Jenkins, said that one of the habits that Wooden created that goes into the category of visualization is that it begins with the end in mind, or the end in sight. It's based on principles of vision, values, and a paradigm of 2 creations or focus. People identify and commit themselves to the principles and relationships and purposes that matter most to them. So trying to relate to the players, what matters most to each individual player. And if they can all find a common ground on what relates most to them and all gear towards that, then you'll have more success, because everyone is fighting for the same common ground than a bunch of different things. Action. This is the pyramid of success. He developed this in 1934, I believe. It was his idea of putting together different qualities that ultimately reached to success. That was more than just what the world said success was, which was wins, money, fame, all that kind of stuff. He believed that success was greater than that, and created or more valuable and more lasting than that, and created what he believed was a set of qualities that if you followed, you would reach success. There is a video, I'm sorry about the audio here, but there's a video of him explaining this. Awesome. The Pyramid of Success was designed as a tool to guide people into achieving their goals. The other aspect of this too, I call walking the walk. You hear it a lot of times, talk the talk, but you should walk the walk. John Wooden lived a life in a way that other people would follow the actions that he lived. Part of that is a story with Clarence Walker. This was an Indiana State player in 1948 that John Wooden, this is a picture of both of them, John Wooden and Clarence Walker. 1948, college basketball was still pretty much segregated. And when he was at Indiana State, they were invited to a postseason tournament, which was older. This is before the NCAA tournament. This is even before the NIT. They were invited to a postseason tournament, and he turned it down because they wouldn't let him bring Clarence Walker. They said that you can bring everybody, you can't bring him. Clarence Walker wasn't even a starter. He was a bench player. John Wooden refused to go 3 different times until they would let him bring Clarence Walker. And because they caved in, Clarence Walker became the first African-American player to compete in the postseason basketball tournament. And that's just an example of his the life that he lived that other people followed. Same with how he treated Louis Alcindor, who is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Bill Walton, and the way that they lived their lives. In closing, tonight I gave you an analysis of John Wooden's use and application of Monroe's motivated sequence by focusing on his use of attention, visualization, and action. And Coach Wooden set up his athletes for success in life after sports by giving them and guiding them an example of class and integrity. He did this both by grabbing their attention, sometimes in blunt ways, as we talked about, helping them visualize their goals both on and off the court, and giving them the tools and guidelines to put their learning into action. Thank you guys again for being a part of this. I really appreciate it, and have a great finals week. Thank you.